Hi, this is all about voluntary disclosures. Gee, I wonder, have you heard those ads on the radio and television? Tax amnesty. Come to us, we're lawyers. You need a lawyer to protect you. And we'll file a voluntary disclosure for you, and we'll file your taxes, and we'll get you looked after. Yeah. There's some truth to that, but there's also some misleading to that. Let's look at what the situation is that would cause you to file a voluntary disclosure. First of all, a voluntary disclosure is you coming forward to disclose information and a desire to pay tax that you haven't reported. And it can't be the current tax year. It has to be more than 3 years old before you can do a voluntary disclosure. Now, if your disclosure is accepted, then there will be no criminal charges and there will be no penalties and no interest on the penalties. So that's all well and good. Now you're going to look at it and say, what do I have to think about before I go into to apply for a voluntary disclosure? You might say, well, I've been a naughty boy or a naughty girl, and gee, I need to do a no-name disclosure to see if they would even accept it. And so you apply for a no-name disclosure, which they will always accept as far as I know. And you feel nice and safe, except that you look at it and on that form it says your gender, your occupation, and the first 3 letters of your area code. With that information, they can find you. So how many people, I gather your birth date, how many people of that birth date, of that age, and that location, that occupation, do you think is in that area code? Well, it's a lot easier than finding a hit-and-run driver, got to tell you that. So I don't buy into that there's any confidentiality in the no-name disclosure. So you look at it and you say, what is it that I'm disclosing? Well, if you have unreported income, let's say in an offshore bank account, and you're concerned that CRA is going to find out, first question you ask yourself, is there anything going on right now? Has CRA asked to audit me? Have they issued any kind of a requirement to pay, requirement to file, any action whatsoever that may unearth this information? If there's anything there, it would then be considered not a valid voluntary disclosure, and by applying, you would have given them permission to go back 10 years, which means that they could audit you for a full 10 years. If your application's not accepted, they can audit you for 10 years. If it is accepted, here's how it works. You do your application for penalty and interest forgiveness is basically what it boils down to, and you're preparing to pay your tax that you're supposed to. It goes to an individual who's right next to the tax filing audit adjustments department. They can see each other. And the person reads it over and says, yeah, that looks reasonable. And he picks it up and smells it and says, hey, passes the smell test. Yep, approve it. You're great. However, if he smells it and it smells bad, it goes into inventory. That inventory means when they get to you, they'll get to you, and then they're going to do a 10 years of investigation into you, and you may not get your disclosure, and you may get the penalties and interest and all that. Let's say, well, what are your alternatives to the voluntary disclosure? You simply file a T1 adjustment, or a T2, depending whether it's personal or corporate. It goes to the department right next door, who looks at it and says, yeah, that looks right, that smells right, and they approve it, and there's no penalties and there's no interest on the, there's just the tax owing and the interest on that tax. And so what's the better option? Well, it depends what skeletons are in your closet. Can you risk that 10-year audit? And if you can't risk the 10-year audit, send in the adjustment. I would recommend doing the adjustment anyway, because it's just going to go through. And CRA gets the T1 adjustment, and they can get the money now, or they can investigate and audit and all the rest of the stuff and delay payment. They just like the money now. So in most cases, you don't have to do a voluntary disclosure, and because it is a lot of work, And if you haven't done it yourself, you shouldn't try, because it's like every other government form. 50% of government applications are turned down because they're not done right. So it has to be done right. It has to be compelling. It has to send a message. It has to be believable. You have to write the right story. It has to be well written, and you have to understand that it's a human being at the other end reading it, and you want them to believe you. You want them to be sympathetic, empathetic, and everything else, and just approve it. So that's how you're going to look at it. And you're going to say, do I need a lawyer to do this? I can't understand why you would. Client privilege, what's that got to do with it? You're coming forward, you're being honest, you're telling the story. How does client privilege help you? Does client privilege stop the government from issuing requirements to provide documentation? No. What is it that the lawyer is going to do for you that needs to protect you? The answer is nothing that somebody who's not a lawyer can't do. I'm not against lawyers. Lawyers are absolutely necessary, but lawyers are business people and they like to make money, and a voluntary disclosure is a nice way to make money. And so that's what it's about. If you know a good lawyer and that lawyer is honest and reasonable, I wouldn't hesitate. If they've done voluntary disclosures before and have a track record of success in them, sure, use a lawyer. Not because they're a lawyer, but because you know them and you trust them. That's what it's about. So the voluntary disclosure program works. The voluntary disclosure backfires or simply doesn't work, and it depends on the presentation, the facts, the circumstances, and who it is that's reading your application. So yeah, get some really good sound advice and make an informed decision about whether you really need to do a voluntary disclosure and whether there's much risk involved in it. And if you've actually been doing bald-faced tax evasion, you are protected by client solicitor privilege. Hire a lawyer, talk to the lawyer, get your advice, and then decide, do you need that lawyer to file the voluntary disclosure program. Because once it's filed, client solicitor privilege isn't going to apply to anything except your conversation, which was never in writing anyway. So that's the way it is. So consider it twice, act once. Have a great day.